request the tech team at the chamber to give me a heads up when we go live. So welcome everybody to the in-depth analysis of the Union Budget 21-22 presented to you by the Bengal Chamber and Dhruva Advisors LLP. So good morning everyone. We would request Mr. Deve Mukherjee, President of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to share the Chamber's overview. Mr. Mukherjee.
Thank you, Angana. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a chilly morning in Calcutta today, and they are predicting the temperature, the mercury will dip even further. So that's very interesting at this time of the year. Coming on the back of a very interesting budget presented by the Finance Minister yesterday. Some of us were there at the chamber, hearing the budget. And I extend a very, very warm welcome to this 9th session of the budget analysis session, as we call it at the chamber. And this year we are presenting that in partnership with Dhruva Advisors LLP. And the structure, I understand, of this budget analysis session would be feedback, takeaways and feedback from economists, from tax experts, and of course from the industry representatives. To my mind, ladies and gentlemen, the budget was an aspirational budget. And it was, I think, it needs to be viewed not in a limited time context of 1 year. Possibly we have to look beyond that in terms of what the budget aspires to achieve. I must compliment the Finance Minister and the government in structuring the budget in a very convincing manner. And as they said, on 6 pillars, the budget stood with the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat at the heart of it. That was indeed very heartening to note. We did see a significant, to a large extent, I would say, significant budget outlays, certain structural and largely, I would say, procedural changes, and certain improvements, though limited to my mind, towards delivering on the aspirations. The focus that we saw on healthcare and infrastructure, that was something we all expected in any case. And both these sectors do have, as we all know, a multiplier effect, especially in generating employment. And I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. The outlay in terms of the healthcare of something like 2.24 lakh crores, as was interpreted, is a 137% increase over previous budget estimates. Now, it's for the experts to really explain how this jump has really happened. But if this is the case, then of course it is again a step in the right direction, with an outlay of, I think, 35,000 crore in towards the vaccination, production, and that could well be another very interesting area, and we could well have the potential of being the vaccine supplier of the world in a way. So I would call it a good vaccine diplomacy that can work to our advantage in more sense than one. Boost in terms of manufacturing towards achieving a $5 trillion economy. There was, the government, I think, committed about 1.97 lakh crore rupees over 5 years by way of production linked incentive to boost manufacturing. And the other heartening point was development, because in order to service all this, especially the MSMEs and other manufacturing outfits, the finance minister did talk about developing a financial institution, some sort of a development financial institution that she talked about, which will garner sufficient funding to lend about 5 lakh crore rupees over the next 3 years. So this debt financing structure maybe again is a step in the right direction. The other very interesting highlight was the approach the government took in terms of the disinvestment of PSUs. And as we all understand, to service such large or committed expenditure, you need revenues. And apart from tax, the tax revenue, disinvestment proceeds is a significant component, would be a potentially significant component towards servicing the expenditure. And there we found that a large number of PSUs are on the block, so to speak. And what was also interesting was to hear the finance minister talk about the IPO of LIC in the insurance sector and raising foreign direct investment from 49 to 74%. And I would very much like the experts to comment on that in terms of a policy initiative, which will certainly have a significant effect over a long period of time. Structurally, there have been moves towards asset reconstruction, managing and monetizing of assets, etc. And certain structural reforms have also been mentioned. But one point which I would again like the experts to comment on is what were the significant steps towards demand stimulation? Because in order for the GDP to grow significantly, and the targets are pretty steep, as we see for this year and the next fiscal year, how has the demand stimulation been addressed? Because at the end of the day, whilst we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, to my mind, the budget also has to look at the common man. And we possibly expected a bit of tax breaks, maybe, some incentives for the common man to make investment, to increase consumption demand, to increase spending, whether there have been, I don't know, reading between the lines, whether there have been sufficient incentives in that direction. I only find that there are certain basic extension of deadlines in terms of tax concessions, but that is not very significant to my mind. So individual taxpayers, there have been no significant tax breaks, exemption limits, deductions, etc. What was also interesting to note is that the government was not totally unmindful of fiscal deficit, which is going to be a very, very tricky and a sticky issue. And they commit that over the next few years, by FY26, the fiscal deficit would be contained at 4.5%. In terms of the indirect taxes, especially on customs duty, we do see that possibly the trend or the focus has been on value-added exports. But to my mind, there are certain anomalies that come when you operationalize and go into the details. And mention can be made of solar industry, where there's a huge push in terms of budget allocation for IREDA and SECI, who are going to take the solar, make India the solar manufacturing hub of the world, possibly. And the finance minister also made mention, the prime minister makes frequent reference to the International Solar Alliance, etc. But we all know that the basic raw material in the solar industry, that has to be imported. So raise in customs duty on these basic raw materials will have an adverse impact in the finished product that comes out of it. And we need to bear in mind that India, though we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, India also has to be a part and play a significant role in the global value chain. But all in all, it's for the experts to deliberate on all these points. But again, a very positive indicator was that the stock market reacted very positively. And I believe the Sensex went up by about 5%, Nifty went up by 4.7%. So that's, of course, a good indicator. Again, for the experts to say whether that will be sustained over a period of time. And on that note, I would pass on to Mr. Sumit Bose, our chairman of the Economic Affairs Committee, to take the discussion forward. Thank you very much again, and welcome to hopefully a very, very productive discussion ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Mukherjee. So that was the Bengal Chamber's overview on the Union Budget 21-22. The Chamber's reaction is available in our social media pages, LinkedIn and Facebook, where this program will also be streamed and would be archived for future viewing of our audience. Now, we call it the Partners Speak. Great pleasure to have Mr. Dinesh Kanabar, the CEO of Dhruva Advisors LLP with us. So we would request Mr. Dinesh Kanabar to please share his overview on the budget.
Thank you, and a very good morning, Mr. Mukherjee. Thank you for inviting us to partner with the Bengal Chamber of Commerce on this important initiative. And it's a pleasure reconnecting with Mr. Sumit Bose after many, many years. I had occasions to discuss and argue the proposals of the finance bill with him, and it's nice to have him today alongside with me to talk about the proposals. Mr. Mukherjee made some very, very interesting and very, very valid points. If I just go back and same time yesterday morning, I was on the electronic media and was being interviewed on CNBC, and I reflect on the questions that were being asked. So almost everybody had reconciled that there will be a 2% COVID tax. It was sort of in the media everywhere. And people had by and large accepted that this government will impose a 2% COVID cess, whether it will be in the form of health cess, whatever. And there were arguments to say the government is levying cess instead of increasing taxes because that doesn't have to be shared with the states. And then there was this whole debate as to whether the government could impose a wealth tax. And if a wealth tax was indeed imposed, would it be a one-time wealth tax or an ongoing thing? So whilst I would agree with you, Mr. Mukherjee, very much that there is not much by way of tax concessions, I think primarily the way I see it is that people were really expecting this budget to sort of raise taxes, and that has not happened. And that's the first positive that I would very much look at. Coming to the macro point which you made again, Mr. Mukherjee, with regard to FDI in insurance increasing from 49% to 74%. I think there have been certain conditions which have been put to protect management in India, etc., etc. The reality of the situation is that not very many foreign insurance companies have actually even hiked up their stake to 49. They are where they are. And therefore, I don't think people are going to rush to put in 74%. That's a matter of taking an overall period of time, but shows that the government wants to move ahead in the direction. I think Mr. Mukherjee made one very important point, and I couldn't agree with him more. A lot of the revenues that are proposed to be raised in this budget are non-tax revenues, are revenues coming from privatization, what divestment, what disinvestment, whatever word you would like to use. And the question, and I'm sure that when Mr. Sumit Bose speaks, he will sort of deal with this a little bit more with his insight, is that will this actually happen? Because implementation is the key. When you speak about National Highway Authority putting all the roads into REIT in which you're looking at 1,75,000 crores of disinvestment proceeds. The past track record of the government in being successful on disinvestment does not give a lot of confidence to say that this is something which will happen on a continuing basis. And that is where I am worried about, that if those targets are not met, where will our budget balances happen? But all in all, I would say that I'm very, very happy that the finance minister has chosen to be on an expansionist plea, road, as opposed to trying to raise revenues through taxes. Just the last 2 months, we have seen that when the expansion of the economy happens, how GST revenues have gone up to 1,20,000 crores in this quarter, in this month of January, 1,10,000 crores in the preceding month. So if the economy was to expand, then clearly there will be more taxes to pay. And again, I think your question, Mr. Mukherjee, as to is there anything to boost consumption is a very, very important question right out there. I just wanted to make maybe a few broad points on the tax proposals. There'll be an in-depth analysis which my colleague Aditya and others will do. But I thought I'll just put a few points which are directional and which are something which I would very much welcome. And I'll also talk about a number of misses which I think have taken place. I think taxes has become something which has been by far the biggest negative on ease of doing business in this country. So if you go and see as to when India is bottomed out, and of course it has now improved over a period of time on ease of doing business, the one thing which pulls us repeatedly down is our tax administration. And I think a number of proposals which have been put by the finance minister are very, very welcome proposals. Let me first begin with putting a time limit of 3 years on reopening of assessment. Every businessman will come and tell you that you get a tax assessment and you say, okay, fine, the officer has now examined my books of accounts records and I am now kosher, everything has been accepted with whatever marginal variations and I'm okay. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, 3, 4, 5 years later, you get a reopening notice. And you come back and say, but then where is the finality? What is the meaning of an assessment order if every 3, 4 years I'm going to be suffering from reopening? And the one very, very, very important change to my mind is to go back and say two things. First, that the time limit for completion of an assessment is just 9 months from the end of the year. And the time limit for reopening is 3 years. And there are, of course, 10-year provision, etc., which we will deal with in detail as you go through the provisions with fine-tooth comb. But a very, very welcome thing, gives you certainty. Everybody wants certainty, wherever you are. You can't be having a Damocles sword, so to say, hanging over you to say, God knows when will some new officer come, look at whatever is required to be done. Similarly, you look at provisions to say that if you are above 75 years of age and you've got only pension and interest income, you don't need to file a tax return. Now, it may not be impacting a significant community, but it denotes a thought process to say that there are senior citizens who have got fixed income. They don't need to go through the rigmarole of having to file a return. Very, very welcome. Another experiment, if I may say so, is for the first time to cut through the litigation and say that if you are a small taxpayer, meaning that your income is less than 50 lakhs, and a tax officer wants to make a variation which is of less than 10 lakhs of rupees, then instead of you going through an appeal process which could last for really years or maybe even decades, you can go to a commissionerate and the commissionerate can sort of decide what way the matter should be done. Very, very welcome. For once, I am an eternal optimist, as my colleagues tell me. But I would just want to caution to say that the devil is in implementation. If this collegium of commissioners who are going to deal with the matters do not approach it in the spirit in which these provisions have been laid out, it will be of no consequence, like the DRP, which was a brilliant concept but implemented very, very poorly. So the devil is in the implementation. A few changes in the tax laws which directionally indicate that the government is listening to people. There was a Calcutta High Court judgment where it was held that under a particular section where there is a withholding tax of 20%, the treaty does not apply. The Act provides 20, and therefore, even if under the treaty the rate is lower, deduct at 20 and then claim a refund. I'm personally aware, working on a number of transactions which have got scuttled only because people came back to say, what is this crazy thing? I can't be paying a 20% tax today and then claiming a refund after 3, 4, 5 years. Doesn't work at all. And the transactions couldn't happen. The government has immediately, this Calcutta High Court judgment was affirmed by the Supreme Court, and they had made representations, including from FICCI, and the government has heard. So again, the government's responsiveness is very, very critical. A few changes which I hope would not have happened, and again, I'm sure Aditya will deal with at length on a reversal of a Supreme Court judgment granting depreciation on goodwill. And I can't understand. I think with due apologies, Mr. Bose, this is the Babudam sort of coming up and sort of wanting to put their two bits to say that yes, we will grant depreciation on intangibles, but not on goodwill. Maybe things which could not have been. One very interesting miss which I saw is that the whole world has made changes to tax laws on account of COVID. So if you have a foreign company and there's somebody in India and he's stuck in India because he can't fly out, that impacts permanent establishment, that impacts place of effective management. And all countries virtually over the globe have made changes. Those changes I didn't see in the finance bill yesterday. Looks like a miss. Maybe they'll come out with a circular. We will make representations. And finally, was this whole issue about Atmanirbhar. And of course, we have the PLI, we have so many things happening. But the one issue on Atmanirbhar which came up is that if you want manufacturing to move from China to India, we have to create a conducive climate. There was one proposal which was put yesterday, and that was the only one which I could see which was concrete, to say that we will set up textile parks. I think if you want to attract serious FDI and you want to create domestic manufacturing capability, increase jobs and whatever else, you need to create a conducive environment. You need to create special economic zones like they have in China, which is plug and play, where you don't need to go and take 20 different approvals. Infrastructure is in place. You come, there is something waiting for you, you plug and play. That's what is needed. And I was heartened to see that the finance minister has proposed something like this in the field of textiles. I think there's a need across all segments. It's not just a question of textiles, whether it is electronic, whether it is whatever else. Unless we are able to go in that direction, we may not be able to really give impetus to moving the manufacturing base from China to India and make India an alternative good supplier to the world. Overall, I would say very positive. The devil is in implementation. We will talk about the devil in the details later on, but the devil is in implementation. I would be worried about two things: the way the tax proposals get implemented and the way disinvestment happens and revenues are realized. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kanabar. We will now move on to the economic perspectives on the budget. This session would be chaired by Mr. Shumit Ghosh, who is the chairperson of the Economic Affairs Committee of the Bengal Chamber and former Revenue Secretary of Government of India. We have as panelists Dr. Pinaki Chakraborty, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Professor Abhirup Sarkar, Professor of Economics, Indian Statistical Institute and Chairman WBI DFC, and Dr. Shiladitya Chatterjee, former member Indian Administrative Service and Asian Development Bank and advisor Center for Sustainable Development Goals of Government of Assam. So with this, I would request Mr. Bose to take the session forward. But before that, just an announcement for the viewers in the cloud platform. You may please share your queries in the chat board. It is only for the viewers in the cloud platform. And to the chairperson of the session, Mr. Bose, I would share the relevant questions in this chat board in the platform where you are in. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mukherjee, Mr. Kanabar, your opening remarks has actually set the tone for the discussions today. There was much expectation from the budget. There is every year. Much of it is belied every year. But I think this time the expectations were more because of the COVID situation. And how much the expectations have actually been realized will be we'll discuss in the course of the morning. Personally, I was enthused about a couple of things in this budget. First of all, better transparency. I think it's amazing how the finance ministry has been able to do away with extra budgetary resources supporting the budget. Budget. The food subsidy, for instance, has been taken completely onto the budget and taken off the EBR, or the extra budgetary resources, relying on the FCI. I think that's a very, very positive thing about the budget. Overall, as I said, transparency, you would have found many more numbers and figures in the finance minister's speech than last year. So I think there is a name for transparency. There's also transparency in, I think, in trying to set out 5-year, or in certain cases 6-year some expenditure numbers for a longer period of sort of a medium-term expenditure, loose framework in the budget speech. Hopefully that will be followed up. There's also, I think, better transparency in revenue, in targeting tax revenues, and they're, I think, below, realistically below tax GDP ratio of 10 this year. So I think there's better honesty in setting targets. These are all plus points, which I thought I would mention from my perspective in the beginning, and then we'll of course get into a discussion since we have such an eminent panel with us. On the negative side, there are the usual things, and one I must mention is the dishonesty which always creeps in. Despite the Finance Commission having said the share of states at 41%, if you do the calculation, you come back to that figure of 30 of the gross tax revenues which are actually getting to the state. But I'm sure we'll have more of that. With that, let me just, what we'll do is I'll try and go to the panelists with one or two issues. We don't have too much time, I find. And then maybe in winding up, I'll leave it to them to talk about one or two issues which they may like to, and which we may have left out. So to start, because there is a lot of expectation on the capital investment. Professor Shavkal, let me go to you. You think that the jump in capital expenditure, which has been provided in the budget across roads, railways, how far do you think that will help creating, not only in creating infrastructure, in providing employment, and how much of that will be realized? Or do you see any pitfalls in that?
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak here. Before I directly answer your question, let me just spend one or two words on the economic stance that the government is taking. If we look at the economic survey, which was published a few days before the budget, you will find that a full chapter was devoted to this growth inequality trade-off. The economic advisor, the chief economic advisor, thinks that if you need to achieve more growth, you have to have more inequality as well. So he has demonstrated that Indian states which have grown at a higher rate have had more inequality. But this inequality comes with better socio-economic performance, better, education, better health, and most importantly, less poverty. So if you have more growth, you have less poverty, but perhaps you have more inequality. So it's the growth which should be the focus of, that is the economic stance of the government. So how do we achieve growth? Now, among economists, there has been some differences of opinion as to whether in these COVID years, as to whether there should be a direct transfer to the, to the underprivileged people who have lost their jobs and so on, Or should one go for a longer term vision of the economy, developing infrastructure, which in turn has two effects. First, it creates jobs directly by providing employment to the places where infrastructure is being created, but also indirectly it improves the environment, the investment environment of the economy, so that it's expected to invite more private investment. So it will crowd in private investment, not crowd out. Now, talking about crowding out, usually this rise in infrastructure investment, there has been a substantial rise. Capital expenditure in general has increased from around 14.5% to almost 16%, which I think is a substantial rise. The question is how to finance this. And the government has taken the route of borrowing to a large extent. There are other means as well, but borrowing is one main means that the government has taken. Now, usually when there is higher borrowing, there is an apprehension that it will drive up the market rate of interest by creating a higher demand for loans. And that, in turn, will discourage private investment. That is the classical crowding out story, right? But this time, I think that is not going to happen. If you look at the data over the last 20 years or so, all over the world, government borrowing has been increasing. But at the same time, interest rates have been falling instead of increasing. Why is that? The reason is that there has been an increase in inequality. Now, inequality in itself is not something desirable, but in this present context, inequality gives more money to the rich who are basically saving their income. There is a limit to which they can consume, so they're saving more. And this higher savings leads to higher supply of funds in the market, so that has helped the rate of interest to remain low. So the government, I think, quite prudently is taking advantage of that, borrowing more, but expecting that the rate of interest is not going to go up. I think that's a welcome, a step. However, this whole thing will take some time. You see, you build up infrastructure, you employ people, and then you invite private investment, all this thing. This is all very good, but there is going to be a time lag. If you need immediate results, maybe the government could have thought of some combination of direct transfer and infrastructure, investment. So the fact that NREGA has been slashed, that I think that worries me to some extent. Because at least in the villages, people who have lost their jobs, they're not immediately going to get employed. So, some support, some direct support to the, underprivileged probably would have helped the poorer section. There is...
Are you...
Yes. Can I just...
any more to that, or will come back second round?
Okay. So do you want me to stop here, or can I continue?
No, unless on that capital expenditure specifically you have anything.
Oh, okay. I think I've answered that. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks. Now let me move on to Pinaki. Pinaki, you are there are two issues. One is this whole business of the fiscal deficit going up to 9.5 and a glide path having been provided. But even for next year, 6.8 is it? It's pretty high. What do you think about the amendment to the FRBM Act? And that is one aspect. And this is actually the first year of the Finance Commission's main award. We had an interim award. How does that play out? What are the recommendations, and how will that play out? And the recommendations of the Finance Commission, to the extent it also impacts the FRBM. Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. On FRBM, yes, as you mentioned in your initial remarks about fiscal transparency, I think the revised estimates number, which shows 9.5% of GDP as the fiscal deficit and revenue deficit at 7.5. It's a really very large number, and in fact, the kind of newspaper media articles we are looking at, we are thinking it will be around 5, 6, maximum 7. So it's 9.5, and then there is the fiscal deficit estimated to be 6.8 in 21-22. Now there is this issue of revenue deficit versus fiscal deficit. We have a 7.5% revenue deficit in the year 2021, and 5.1 is expected in budget estimates of 21-22. Now this is also on a GDP growth rate in nominal term at 14.4%. So if we take the economic survey, which talks about 11% GDP growth rate in real term, and then we take 4% plus, so we are talking about around 15% nominal term GDP growth rate and a fiscal deficit of 9.5, and then there is a disinvestment target of 1.68 lakh. So there are fiscal risk associated with this number, but given that inflation is high and the budget is always a current expenditure and in nominal terms, so if we have there is this argument about reducing the nominal value of debt, but through higher inflation, I think that happens if our GDP growth is larger. Maybe we'll remain at around that level, 9 to 9.5. Going forward, 25-26, we are talking about 4.5% as the fiscal deficit for the center, and states up to 23-24. Finance Commission has recommended that it will be 4. So we are basically talking about a fiscal deficit which is in aggregate as a percentage of GDP above 6%. So that's the new normal. I think before 25-26, we really will not be able to say that aggregate general government deficit will be 5.5 to 6% of GDP. I think that will take time, and it will be only after 25-26 unless something happens. But what can happen possibly one thing that we haven't looked at, probably need to analyze more. I think we are also at the same time talking about GDP growing at 7-8% in the next 3-4 years. And if we are talking about a 4% fiscal deficit, and we are at the same time talking about $5 trillion economy, that means in nominal term our fiscal deficit will be significantly larger than the 3% term. So probably somewhere between 21-22 to 25-26, there would be a need to relook at this number, whether we should stick to 4.5 or should we slash it down to 3. I think that is something which needs to be examined while going through this glide path of reduction. I think it will be prudent if the growth picks up and revisit this number. That's the first issue that I would say. But for the state, since capital expenditure, we talk about center should spend more, but once center stop giving loans to the states, if we look at the capital expenditure in real sense, centers as a percentage of GDP has not increased very significantly. It hasn't declined also. Center is unnecessarily blamed for that. But it's only an accounting. Now states directly go to the market and borrow, and that is booked as states capital expenditure. So basically 2/3 of the capital expenditure is at the state level. So with a 4% GDP, and if the revenue deficit at the state level is contained, I am sure that would increase the general government capital expenditure, which has got significant implication on regional growth. So we are not talking about aggregate 10% or 11% nominal growth, but we are talking about what would happen because at the state level, because if 60% of the GDP comes from 6-7 major states of the country, and if they are having adequate fiscal space for capital spending, I think that dimension will have to be taken into consideration when we are talking about FRBM flexibility at the state level up to 23-24. On the FC transfer, I would just say that yes, FC transfer has given priority to the fiscal stability. I think there is no major change. It is at 42%, so that means a fiscal stability for the year for 10 years, because it was 42 recommended by the 14th, and 41 excluding JNK is actually 42. So there is no change in the vertical share. And I also believe that Finance Commission implicitly, I haven't read the full report, but looking at the recommendations, it implicitly has taken the grant route to compensate for the decline in tax devolution, because the revenues have fallen. So if you look at the revenue deficit grant for the year 21-22, there has been an increase from 74,000 crore in 2021 to 1,20,000 to 22,000 crore. That is 64% increase in the revenue deficit grant in 1 year. And this is a money which is fixed in nominal terms, and 17 states are going to get, including Tamil Nadu, though a small amount. So a lot of major states are, the general category states are going to get these resources, and which is a certainty again in terms of money flowing to the states, not at tax level, which has got the problem of, if the revenue falls, they will not get. So that certainty will give some assured fiscal space to the states. So that's the way I look at it. And there are a lot of performance incentive grants given. So details of that will have to be worked out. And Commission also has talked about a body which looks after, the implementation of the recommendations of those performance incentive grants. So I think in terms of Finance Commission's recommendation, I think overall resource flow, we don't see any major change or decline. In fact, it remains where it was, and I think it was prudent to have that. And with a higher borrowing power, I think the fiscal space at the state level for capital expenditure in the medium term should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinaki. Now we'll come to Shiladitya. Shiladitya is my batchmate, and unlike me, he's a trained economist, so you can expect much better from him in what you get. Shiladitya, the economic survey claims that the measures adopted in this pandemic were based on the humane principles drawn from the Mahabharata. That I'm not mine saying, the economic survey says that. Do you see any of these, of the humane principles in the budget of yesterday? And if you do, what are they? If you don't, where are the shortfalls? You're muted. Shiladitya, you're muted. Unmute. Shiladitya, unmute.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I was muted. Thanks a lot, Sumit, and thanks again to Bengal Chamber for inviting me to give my thoughts on the budget. I actually was there yesterday with the Chamber, and I heard the entire speech of the Finance Minister. Now, I think there were two major expectations from the budget. One was that there would be a very strong push towards recovery and growth. And the other was that, we had, of all countries in the world, we had undergone the most severe lockdown and the most severe containment measures. And that had led to huge social problems. We saw on our television screens the plight of migrants and so on and so forth. Horrible situation, which still persists. So we expected that there would be, as you mentioned, some humane treatment to look after those. So what I am planning to do is to talk a little bit about the equity aspect of the budget, which I hoped would come through. On the recovery aspect, it's done very well. I think the 6.8% GDP stimulus, fiscal deficit stimulus, I think is appropriate. In fact, it could have been, in my view, bolder, given the circumstances. The push in infrastructure, MSMEs, the financial sector recapitalization, and so on, these are all very, very positive measures, and government gets very high credit for that. But where it falls short, in my view, is in the equity aspect. So equity is, I can look at it in 5 different ways. Income, first of all. Income inequity has been growing very large in India. It's It's become lots of reports have come out recently explaining that. And I would have thought, I was one of those who thought that maybe the direct tax regime could have been used as an instrument to bring about some progressivity, and maybe assess at this time on the very high incomes would have helped the overall revenue position of the government without impacting on incentives at the very high end. That I think is a debate which needs to be thought through and carefully discussed, and maybe we missed an opportunity there. As far as the other types of inequality, which is inequality between different groups in our society, and we have high inequality amongst, for example, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, who are much below the general population in terms of social outcomes. There should have been a very big thrust towards them to rectify that. But if you look at the budget numbers, as far as the outlays for the ministries of social welfare and scheduled tribes, while that has been just barely maintained, the outlays for the Ministry of Minority Affairs and Women and Child Development, gender aspect, for example, women, that has in fact been cut. So this is one very negative aspect of the budget, which I hope will be corrected in supplementaries. The other major area where India lacks is social protection. India, according to ADB, spends about 1.6% of its GDP on social protection compared to the Asia Pacific average of 4.2%. And even among South Asian countries, we're not doing as well as, let's say, Sri Lanka or even Pakistan. We are very, very low in social protection, and we don't have a regime for social insurance as such. But there are certain schemes which were very good, which are very good, which have major impact, such as the Manrega, for example. And the Manrega rightly was expanded during the crisis, during last year. But there has been a sharp decline in Manrega allocations. Now, this is, again, something which is very worrying. Manrega should be retained at the level as last year. And in fact, it should be extended to the urban areas, in my view. And also, the ration, the free ration program, which was introduced, seems to have been curtailed. There is still a lot of distress which continues. I think that has to be also looked at. As far as access to health and other social basic services are concerned, which is again a very major aspect of social equity, we have done very well on the health side, which is long overdue, and it has been rectified. But I don't see too much on the education side as yet. Basic education remains a major problem. Quality of education is abysmal in our country, unfortunately, and much more needs to be done, even by the central government. Even though I know the states have a major role to play, but I think Central should, through its national schemes, should play a much bigger role in taking a lead in this area. The last aspect of inequality is spatial, geographical inequality. There's a huge inequality between different parts of our country. The East and the Northeast, for example, remain backward. Rural and urban areas, very big difference. Now, as far as rural-urban is concerned, the government has done a very good job this time. Very high marks for that, because a huge expenditure increase has been made for rural infrastructure development, from 30,000 crores, I believe, to 40,000 crores, if I heard the announcement correctly. So that's a very positive thing. But as far as, let's say, the Northeast, now I'm from the Assam Meghalaya cadre, and I've worked for a long time. My special interest is in the Northeast. And I find, for example, this is one area which has remained historically neglected from the partition time because of locational disadvantages and so on and so forth. But if you look at the allocations for the Ministry of Development of Northeastern Region, actually the allocation from the budget estimates of 2021 have in fact fallen by 12.8%. So this is is worrying. Assam, for example, faces a huge amount of floods every year. This is a perennial problem. So one would have expected, for example, river basin management, where Brahmaputra board, allocations for Brahmaputra board are, that should have been expanded, but in fact, it has suffered a small cut. One positive area is tea. In tea, the tea board, there's been an increase in allocation. This is very, very appropriate. And I heard that there's been some measures for the welfare of tea garden workers. So I think that is positive, but overall, I would have expected much more. So on the whole, while there is a huge positive thrust for recovery and towards growth, unfortunately, I think the budget has not given sufficient attention to the equity aspect. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. So now, one issue which I think is troubling everyone is whether, and it was raised in the morning in the opening remarks too, is whether this target of 1,75,000 crore as disinvestment proceeds would indeed be achieved. I think there's been this time the government has in the budget laid down not only about disinvestment of PSUs and named the ones. Some of the names we were also there in the last year's budget speech or after the speech. The usual suspects, Air India, BPCL, they continue to be there. The IPO of LIC still has to be done. But so that's something which is worrying. But in addition, there's been a thrust on monetization of assets. And again, I think Mr. Mukherjee raised whether NHAI would, and Mr. Kanawar both, about whether how much would come out of this. Two InvITs are actually given in the speech, one for NHAI, one for Power Grid, and I think those are small, 5,000 and 7,000 crores respectively, and that should be achievable. So now coming to this, let's move, and I think Professor Sarkar, you can take this one. Well, what do you think about this disinvestment target? We're now looking at one is how far will it be achieved? Will the government be able to do something different this time? Because every year there's a shortfall in disinvestment targets. My time as well as disinvestment secretary, we had a shortfall. Over the years, we've been having this. Yes.
Yeah, I am also worried about this disinvestment aspect of the budget. As has already been pointed out, targets are difficult to achieve, but that's one side of the story. I am all in favor of disinvesting public sector units which are not profitable. You know, economic logic dictates that the government should sell them off. There is no quarrel about that, cannot be any quarrel about that. However, my point is that this is a very bad time to sell national assets. The reason is simple. All over the world, wherever potential buyers are there, the world is going through a phase of recession. So in these bad years, one cannot expect to fetch a very high price for the national assets. So one possibility is that the government is just unable to sell the assets. The other possibility is that if the government can sell the assets, they will be sold at a much lower price. And that will be a national loss. Instead, I think the government would have waited for a couple of years for the world economy, for the national economy to pick up to sell the asset. In any case, the government is aiming 1,75,000 to fetch, expecting the sell assets to fetch 1,75,000 crores. That is not a small amount, but considering the total expenditure, that could have been obtained in different ways, like borrowing and things like that. Maybe the government should have waited for selling this asset. The other thing is that if you are selling, let's say, Air India, I'm all in favor of that. But this is a time when, if it's actually sold, there would definitely be layoffs. And this is a time when you cannot afford layoffs. You know, people are already in stress, people are already losing their jobs. So, this is not the right time to increase the pool of unemployed people. So that is another reason why this is a bad time to sell the asset.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Radka. One could take a slightly different view to yours. See, as we were talking in the morning, again, the stock markets have been soaring. Yet, PSU valuation has been going down consistently. So I think everyone's reached a conclusion that government is incapable of running the PSUs. The PSUs are incapable of running themselves because of government being there at a level in the same manner as private sector companies run themselves. And in that context, there's no reason why LIC should not fetch a good price, say in the IPO. So I'm saying that is a possible view there which could be taken also. We're running short of time, but Pinaki, would you like to comment? You know, one thing is this expenditure in health. Now, health and education, Shiladitya also mentioned that health, a lot has been done. And health is a state subject. This time, this health and well-being, the expenditure, which has been given an annex to the budget speech, not only the Department of Health, Family Welfare, Health Research and Ayush, which is the traditional ministry. There's also drinking water and sanitation and the FC grants, which are total to make about 2.23 lakh crores of health expenditure. And that's where the numbers then, it goes up by 137%. What do you think, especially, how do you think this will get translated? States, what will the state finances, how will they impinge on this? Pinaki, if you could give us an insight into that. You're muted. Please unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, but I think as far as health expenditure is concerned, if we take the aggregate general government view, I think around 67% of the health expenditure, aggregate government health expenditure, is at the state level. So central government expenditure is mainly through the CSS. And now if we see this 137% increase in health expenditure, and that and if we add up a kind of an idea that appears from the budget proposal, that a convergent approach is taking health, nutrition, water supply, pollution, including the vehicle scrapping policy, to see that overall health outcome increases. One has to see in terms of, aggregate fiscals. So some of these, but a large part of it is CSS. So there is this 60-40 division there. So states have to put that money in. And secondly, I think there has been, I was looking at the recommendation of the Finance Commission. Finance Commission also has proposed that the aggregate health expenditure of center and states together should be increased to 2.5% by, I think, 24-25. So that's the target Finance Commission has given. And this allocation should enhance the aggregate fiscal space, but to get to that target of 2.5% in the next 2-3 years, I am not too sure whether that would happen. But overall increase is in the budget at the central level is very significant in this year. But to sustain this level of spending going forward will be difficult given the overall fiscal adjustment path that has been followed. So what is required is more fiscal space at the state level, and see that the state's fiscal space does not decline, which is again linked to, various issues related to GST collection, then issues related to borrowing, as well as, how we treat revenue deficit, because health expenditure is again mostly revenue expenditure in nature. So that part will also have to be seen, how the states are constrained by the FRBM and its revenue deficit path. I haven't looked at the revenue deficit trajectory that states have to follow, but I think that would also have an implication on the overall spend.
Thank you. Shiladitya, you talked a bit about spatial inequality, but would you like to say anything more about the Northeast as a whole, or the special categories? What were the special category states of Pinaki? What are they now called in the Finance Commission thing? The special category states? They're
Northeasterns and other hilly states.
Northeastern and other hilly regions. That's the erstwhile special category states. About equity there.
Yes, Sumit. As I did mention, I would have hoped, as an advisor to the state government on the SDGs, we had made a calculation about how much of the gap would come about to achieve the SDGs, and we found that of states' resources and the total requirement, there was a gap of 40% between the two. And this is something which weaker states, and this is something, all over India, I suppose all the weak states will have this problem, particularly the special category states. And therefore, the role of the center is very, very big. And I would therefore have liked to see a scaling up of support for health and education and other areas for the special category states. And then hopefully I want us to look at the numbers. But if you look at National Health Mission, for example, even though health as a whole, the expenditures have gone up, but I looked at the National Health Mission numbers, they remain more or less the same. And we know the situation, basically primary health is supported by the National Health Mission. And we need a scaling up. And particularly these states where who don't have adequate resources, if they are to achieve the SDGs, then we will require a much more support from the central government towards these states. And this is something which needs to be, I think, highlighted. And again, there's certain issues particular to the states. They have very fragile environment. And environment, forests, river basins, climate change is causing havoc year in or year. The floods are increasing. But as I mentioned, the allocation for Brahmaputra board is river basins as a whole has gone down. The allocation for also environment and climate change as a whole has fallen by 7.5%. So I think we are not providing adequate, attention to some of these very, very, very critical areas, and which particularly affect the northeastern region. Let me stop there.
Okay, we have reached so a concluding sentence or two from each of you, then, because we reached the end of our. We can start with you, Shiladitya, this time.
Yeah, I think, as I said, the very, very good budget as far as recovery and growth is concerned, but insufficient attention, I think, to the social aspects, which were also critical, particularly at this time. Yeah.
Professor Chautar?
I think the budget is good from a growth point of view. I will agree with Mr. Chatterjee. But from the point of view of equity, especially risk for the poor, that has increased. And one wonders whether the poor is capable of taking so much risk.
Pinaki? Unmute.
Yeah, fiscal stimulus in the budget for the year 2021 and 21-22, if we look at, it's much larger than what was estimated earlier. So that way, I think that also helped recovering the process, quickly. I think I think it should be sustained, and in that context, higher capital expenditure is very important. On the question of social sector spending and expenditure on livelihood, security, and social protection, I think we also need to take an aggregate view. I think a lot of reprioritization is happening at the state level, and we have no idea about state budgets at the moment post-pandemic, except Kerala. No other states have presented their budget. I think it will be good once we have an aggregate view of what has happened post-pandemic to the social sector spending, social protection, livelihood, security. I think that aggregate view is also critically important to understand how we have moved in the last 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think all in all, we are saying it's a positive budget for growth. There are certain shortcomings in perhaps that equity aspects needed more emphasis. And we are going to take you up, Pinaki. With your help, we'll organize something for the Bengal Chamber after all the state budgets are done. And we'll take your help for that. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shotkar. Thank you, Shiladitya. Thank you, Pinaki, and for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was indeed an insightful session with the economic perspective on the Union Budget 21-22. Our sincere thanks from Bengal Chamber and Dhruva Advisors LLP to our speakers, Mr. Sumit Bose, Dr. Pinaki Chakraborty, Professor Abhirup Sarkar, and Dr. Shiladitya Chatterjee. The audience who are with us in the streaming, cloud streaming, and in LinkedIn and YouTube, you continue to be with us. For Facebook audience, we will just relive the session and we'll take a couple of minutes break.